All right, welcome, folks. Thanks for joining us for this month's Ask Mayfield Anything. We're going to spend some time talking about tariffs and the energy storage market, a ever-evolving topic and things that are seemingly changing in real time. So I appreciate you taking the time to join us and talk with our guests. As people are joining in and as we're getting going, first off, we have a quick poll, just kind of understanding, if there's specific things you want to ask or learn about during today's presentation. I would love to hear that, and so we'll gather that information and try and look at that as we're going along. And then one of the other things for those of you who maybe haven't joined one of our Ask Mayfield Anythings before, we really enjoy this being interactive, getting folks to ask questions, join in on the conversation. And so there is a Q&A function in the Zoom meeting. And so Q&A, you can submit your question. All of the panelists will see it and we'll be able to address some of those questions. If it's in real time, we'll try and answer them. Sometimes we get a lot of questions and we can't get through them all. And then if I see questions coming up that I know we're going to talk about in a bit, we might hold off on those questions as well. But nonetheless, we really appreciate people's questions and love seeing those. So fire away. We did get some questions beforehand, and so we will do our best on integrating those into the conversation as well. So with that, it's a big topic, and so I don't want to spend too much time on the housekeeping stuff. I want to make sure we get into it, but I want to introduce myself. I'm Ryan Mayfield, founder of Mayfield Renewables, and this webinar series, Ask Mayfield Anything, we've been doing for over 4 years now, and being able to bring on some really smart people, have some great conversations, and today will definitely be the case with that. So, I'm happy that you're here. I'm excited for the conversation. And for those of you who maybe don't know Mayfield Renewables, we are a engineering firm. We provide strategic support around solar and solar plus storage projects. And so we do consulting engineering. We have project engineering that we provide plan sets for our customers, and then education and training. So things like doing this webinar, we have dispatches, which is another webinar that my colleagues work on and do. And then we have a number of online classes, real-time classes as well. So quite a variety of ways of engaging education and training. And then I'll do a quick plug for it now, but in October, we're going to do our second educational summit. There'll be a slide towards the end on that. So in Seattle, we'll have 2 full days of education and training around solar and solar plus storage topics. So I want to introduce our 2 guests and give them an opportunity to introduce themselves, kind of where they sit in the energy storage world. And I'm really excited for both of these guys. Alex Shore, managing partner of GridVest, and GridVest is a company that's out there doing a lot of procurement. And Alex, I'll let you kind of help make sure that I get that right. But I know you guys are helping on the procurement side, on the purchasing side, and passing that along, selling directly to folks out there in the energy storage world. So, yeah, will you give us a little bit about GridVest? And the other thing I want to note, you might say this as well, but reading through your bio, you spent 9 years living in China. So this is, I think, something that you are probably near and dear to your heart, and something that you probably have a lot of information on. That was one of the reasons, one of the things I caught my eye was like being able to have you come on and talk about this, because I know the tariffs and China, I know they're not exclusive to China, but that's a big part of that conversation. So yeah, would you mind just kind of giving a brief intro to yourself and kind of what you're doing these days?
Yeah, great. Yeah, happy to. Thanks for having me, and happy to be here with you guys. Basically, GridVest is a battery storage distributor, financier, and we are procuring battery storage equipment for CNI customers, utility scale customers, and making it a lot easier, because the procurement process when you're dealing with manufacturers, especially overseas, is quite challenging. A lot of late night phone calls, a lot of logistics, and a lot of just quality questions. And on top of that, we have our own capital that we're providing flexible payment terms. So for us, it's a really great way to help make the battery storage ecosystem a little more accessible. And as you mentioned, 9 years in China allows me to work with a lot of the top Chinese suppliers and Obviously, we're expanding across the world to supply chains wherever they go. So yeah, thanks for having me and excited to talk about tariffs today.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. I'm excited to talk about tariffs. Maybe as a nice way to put it, but I appreciate it, Alex. And then Drew Lebowitz, managing director over at PowerSwitch, also author of the BESS book, which is I meant to bring here. I have my copy, Drew. It's on my nightstand. I'm working through it. I meant to bring it here today to hold up to prove it, but I forgot it at home. So it's great to have you here. PowerSwitch, you're doing consulting on specifically around energy storage systems. And it looks like you do, technical, economic support for customers. If I'm not mistaken, you all are, doing a lot of utility scale projects, but I think the knowledge, kind of translates down into more C&I type projects as well. But would love to hear more about what you're doing, kind of maybe, where you came from and how you got to writing the best book as well.
Thanks very much, Ryan, for the intro. And yeah, great to be here today. As you mentioned, PowerSwitch, we are focused on utility scale energy storage projects, but we do some CNI or portfolios of CNI. The work we do is really focused in three bins. We do independent engineering for storage projects. So that's mostly related to the finance and doing diligence around the finance of those projects. We also do owner's engineering. We typically don't do design work ourselves, but we would work on behalf of an owner to work with an EPC, work through the design, get projects built. And lastly, we have kind of a special projects bin, which includes some expert witness support, as well as training seminars similar to this, both private and public seminars that we do. And as you mentioned, we have the BESS book, which is, we call it a cell to grid guide to utility scale energy storage. Really covers everything from the basics of the technology to how it's financed, how it's built. We're actually in the process of writing a new edition. It's only about a year old, but the industry is advancing so quickly with things like tariff and everything else. We have some new info coming out. So great to be here today and excited to talk tariff.
Awesome. Thanks. Another thing I meant to mention, and as I was introducing you, you've also lived abroad, and speak a number of languages. So I was very impressed when I read that on your bio. So both of you, excited to have you both. Also very jealous of both of you having that experience of living abroad. So looking forward to getting your perspectives on everything that we have to talk about today. All right, so let's jump into the topic. What do tariffs mean for the energy storage market? And one of the things as we were preparing for this talk, the three of us were talking a lot about kind of how to focus on this, where to spend our time and effort. One of the things I just want to put out there for the audience now, it's hard not to start talking about the IRA, start talking about the current legislation, things that are happening in Congress right now. And there's definitely going to be some talk of that, but at the very same time, we're trying to really focus in on the tariffs. The two are very intertwined, and it's hard to completely separate them. So just keep that in mind as we're going along, and we'll kind of try and delineate if when we start talking about those things. But definitely the tariffs was the intention for our conversation here. And so for the folks on the call, I'm sure this is not anything new for you. Lots of headlines. We could have picked a bunch of different headlines coming out of this, but nonetheless, we have, tariffs. And as I mentioned in the intro part, China gets a lot of the attention, and kind of rightfully so, as we're going to see here in a few minutes. We'll talk about, where the batteries are coming from, where the components are coming from, China just being the lion's share of all of that. And so we see a lot of, headlines around tariffs in China. And kind of, I think maybe one of the things to also set off here in the beginning is it's not just China that's where we're seeing this, but nonetheless, because of the origin of a lot of the materials, that is definitely the country that probably gets the most attention and that we talk about the most. And then I think the other thing to kind of point out here, or to at least draw attention to, is that bottom where the tariffs stay until late 2025. So we're going to look at next slide, just kind of talking about the tariff, the numbers, the values on the tariffs. But where we stand today is, at least till August, having some tariffs in place and having some stability, which it is what it is, if for good or for bad, I guess you could say. We know where we stand as of right now, at least for another 90-ish days, or maybe not quite 90 days, but into August. Drew or Alex, anything I guess to add on the just kind of the setup of all this?
Yeah, I think
I
I
can just
could
go for it, Drew.
I could jump in and say that I think the way the energy storage industry is structured today, like so many industries, is an interplay between a lot of different components and players all over the world. And even if there are firms that manufacture or integrate their systems in the U.S., let's say Tesla, for example, a lot of them depend on a lot of parts from China. Things like the battery cells and battery modules that come in from overseas. So this is hitting a lot of different ways, both suppliers that totally do their manufacture overseas versus ones that do manufacture partly or wholly in the US. We'll talk about some ways there are some domestic entirely as suppliers, but I think it's important to note that it's having impacts across everyone, really, regardless of how you put your product together. You're going to have some components that come from China or from other countries that have been hit with tariffs.
Yeah. And I think that's very much agree with that, Drew. And I just want to add that I think, the good news is that the battery components and battery cells are becoming a smaller percentage of the overall battery storage when you look at inverters and EMS solutions. And so as the cost out of, let's say, China continues to come down, tariffs have a less over time level and less of an impact on the price of an overall system. That's one thing to note. And then obviously right now there is a nice little window where the tariffs are back to a more what I would call reasonable level. And the expectation is that they'll stay for some time, but we'll see. But there is this kind of opportunity to kind of, let's say, stock up before the uncertainty continues later this year. And we're quite certain that 2026 there will be additional tariffs as they're already kind of on the books from the Biden administration for an additional 25%. At be expected. So I think that's, just a good opportunity, and I'm excited to talk about it today with you guys because, yeah, how do you navigate all this?
Yeah, great points. And I think you mentioned, I think, kind of alluding to some safe harboring. So I think we'll probably touch on that here as well when we're kind of talking about some of the strategies and things like that. And that was a comment that somebody had made around that. So let's take a look real quick at kind of the state of the tariffs, I guess you could say. And so what you're looking at here is just the percentage, the tariffs percentage versus a timeline here. And the thing that I kind of want to point out in the beginning, so we have some specific dates and we have some specific increases there associated with those dates. So starting back in, pre current administration, we had some tariffs already in place. We had 11.9% on batteries and we had 25% on inverters. And so that's what you're looking at, both energy storage and inverters, two of the major components here for our systems. And so really what you're seeing is just this increase. We had 10% increases in February, again in March, and again in April. So we saw, this upward trend, 10%, 10%, 10% of these just increases. And then kind of probably the one that everybody was in shock and awe about, we had this additional 115%. So April 5th and April 9th, we had these two different increases totaling 125% in the net. And then May 14th, we see this reduction down of 125% reduction. So basically taking away what had happened earlier in April. And so now, kind of where we sit is this 41.9% for our energy storage systems. And Alex, you were talking about this, and so the executive order has this pushed out until, I believe it was a 90-day time period from when it got signed, and so that pushes us out into August. And on paper, if I remember you right, you said that it's set to increase back up, but that's not what the expectation is. I don't know if you have
Yeah.
some stuff you can talk about on that.
Yeah, well, I think also want to just call out too that the other unique thing about this executive order from May 12th is, which then was put into effect on May 14th, is that it was actually the 90 days was set from the date of um, through going through customs. Typically, in the past, in the previous changes were all based on the date, the shipment date. And so that really threw people for a little bit of a loop because they're like, oh, 90 days, great. That shouldn't be a problem to get everything on a boat by then. But then to say, oh, wait, actually, it's 90 days. I have to actually get it through customs while everyone else in the world is trying to get through customs. That makes it a little more challenging. So the reprieve was like exciting, and then people realize, uh-oh, it's not quite as exciting. But it's still obviously something, especially for people who already had product ready to ship or products that are on a boat already in transit. But to answer your question, yeah, I think the expectation is that there'll be some level of extension or at least or a slight increase to the current level. But I think the by and large, everyone I've spoken to, as well as if you saw that article earlier from Bloomberg, which talks about 22 analysts, no one expects them to go back to where they were. I think that was shown to be not a great strategy or approach. And I think that the economic implications of that tariff, if held for a long time, would have been quite dramatic. But obviously, it's going to be a continual tool in the toolbox to negotiate with China and various other countries. So can never really predict the future, obviously, this administration. But luckily, the current expectation is again through the end of the year there will be the tariff will be at somewhat of a manageable level. Again, going into 2026, it's harder to predict. But yeah,
And,
Drew, I
and
don't know
just
if you have thoughts.
Yeah, just to add to that, I mean, I wanted to point out that this graph we're looking at now covers 8 months, and it's such a short timeline, and you're talking about 90 days. I mean, I just wanted to point out that at least in the utility scale projects we work on, usually they're taking say 2 to 3 years of time from the kind of initial financial modeling to getting your products ordered and financed and built. Of course, I think C&I would be shorter and residential even shorter than that, but still. I just wanted to point out that the life cycle of these projects is generally quite long, and the short time scale of these things is just really wreaking havoc on decision making in business, and it's just very difficult to predict because a lot of the projects have a pretty tight financial model that's designed around certain costs, and yeah, a few percent here and there would make a huge difference in the end. But these massive jumps are just making it very difficult for anyone to make decisions and I think that'll continue to be the case is that uncertainty.
Right. Yeah, and I think that the uncertainty, as we were preparing for all of this, I mean, we're kind of showing a little bit of tongue in cheek there on, between now and August, not really sure what's happening, what won't happen, where we'll land. Uncertainty definitely seems to be a big part of this. And so, question came through, so I just want to make clear. So, yeah, the really the tariffs that have been additive or that we've seen right now today stick. It looks, it started off at, pre current administration, pre-Trump, we had, 11.9% on batteries, 25% on inverters. And so right today we're seeing 41.9 and 55%. And so, the third basically a 30% increase on those. So it's not that we didn't have tariffs before or anything like that. It's just this increase. And I think to your point, Drew, the uncertainty of it all and the timeline aspect is a great one of, yeah, we're not even 8 months in, we're, only four months in, and we're, projecting out till August kind of thing. And so being able to put that into perspective is an important part, but it is very difficult for anybody to do your financial modeling and to be able to effectively feel like you can have real numbers that you can put in front of a client and with any sort of certainty, I think is kind of the big case here. All right. So let's talk a little bit more about, kind of the costs and Drew, this was, as we were preparing, you had a great point and kind of helped pull this together. So this Volta Foundation report showing some of our numbers or dollars per kilowatt hour. And I think I didn't go through and read this super close, but I'm presuming this is more utility scale kind of numbers. But I think that probably the trend would be similar for the industry as a whole. But I think one of the great points that you made, and I'll let you elaborate on it, is kind of this looking at, from 23 to 24, we saw this reduction of 40% of, pricing. We're seeing basically a 41, almost 42% increase. So on some levels, we're rolling back the clock a couple of years in terms of pricing.
That's right. Yeah, I think it's easy to look at that graph on the previous slide and say, "Oh my goodness, the costs are going to the moon," and obviously concerning with tariffs. But at the same time, I think it's important to zoom out a little bit and look in the broader scale of where battery and inverter costs have been and how quickly they've come down. This shows back only about 6 years. If we were to keep going back, it would be, I think, up to that $600-700 level, really only a few years before this chart starts. And just for context, too, we're looking at now, this is dollars per kilowatt hour, just for size now. Say a residential product tend to have, say, 15 kilowatt hours or so, up to, commercial industrial, maybe 100 to 200 kilowatt hours, depending on the product. And then most of the utility scale products are up to about 5,000 kilowatt hours in a 20-foot enclosure. So for utility scale, you'd be talking at 165, where we're at currently, you're down at about $800,000 for this product, which, just a few years ago, that same amount of storage capacity was going to cost you, say, over $2 million, for that same product. So while, yes, tariffs are scary, they're coming very quickly. It really is just, I'd say, a road bump or a blip in terms of the broader curve, which is, those prices really falling and continuing to fall, similar as to what happened in the solar industry. I think anyone who knew the industry well, you'd see, like, back in 2022, there was that uptick. That was mainly caused by some shortages, both in lithium carbonate, which is one of the key inputs to batteries, as well as some kind of lingering logistics issues after the pandemic. That was a blip that went up. The industry kind of, had some difficulties of projects that were signed. Ultimately, the prices came down. I think in the long run, we certainly hope that this current, increase in tariffs may be something similar, that it's a road bump. Of course, not knowing what the future holds, there can be, big rushes to try to get things in just because you don't know. And of course, projects that are underway, may have big liquidated damages or other things that are, causing them to have incur a lot of costs because of this. Yeah, that's just a little bit about the broader environment. I think Alex wanted to make some comments on the timelines for those pieces of equipment.
Yeah, and I think, Drew, yeah, just to reiterate, right? These prices are very much like more utility scale side. Obviously, the cost per kilowatt hour goes up when you're buying smaller scale systems like CNI and Resi. But it is definitely indicative of where it's going. And I think if you could show 2025 there, you would have seen, at least for the tariffs aside, you would see the prices continue to decrease. At least from an FOB perspective, right out of the factory. And another thing, Drew, just to add on what you were saying, is that you mentioned 5 megawatt hour container today, roughly 800,000. But don't forget that 10 years ago, it would have probably been 2 containers worth of batteries to get 5 megawatt hours. So also the miniaturization of these systems, or the increases in the scale of the cells, is also helping to reduce things like shipping and the costs and the container cost itself and things like that. So that's another way they're figuring out ways to optimize costs, even when other things like tariffs are increasing. But back to what you mentioned about lead times. So I think that's the other thing right now. There has been an opportunity for lead times with essentially an oversupply of capacity, especially for cells, because of the tariffs. So a lot of projects that were orders that were going to go forward earlier this year, they got put on hold. And now, of course, with this 90-day window that's open, there's been a big rush in producing a bit of backlog in the short term, but still, from a pricing perspective, there's still downward pressure on the pricing, and I expect that continue to fall as the increase in capacity from the top cell manufacturers continues. Right, those cell manufacturing lines don't sleep. And every day that there's a delay or a slowdown somewhere, like the US, one of the biggest energy storage markets, it starts to create a backlog. So although there are other markets like Canada, and I've heard a lot of manufacturers looking at Africa and even Europe, some of that excess capacity, there's still this kind of backlog due to tariffs. And so my point is that later this year and into 2026, that you should see raw prices continue to slowly decline. And lead times right now are about 4 to 6 months for most manufacturers. Sometimes we can get batteries delivered as quick as 2 to 3 months to meet this 90-day window. We've been able to do that. And especially if cells are already kind of ready to go, and it's just about assembling them into a container and cabinet. So I think you're looking at 4 to 6 months on average for battery from the beginning of an order to ship to your site in the US through customs. And so just keeping that in mind, that a lot of people now are thinking about end of 2025 is a big date for a lot of, especially CNI projects. Like you said, Drew, utility scale is probably, they're not that thinking that short term, but if you need to get batteries delivered this year, you're going to need to place an order in the next 30 days, probably, because Q4 is going to start getting more and more busy and backlogged, and those lead times are going to start stretching out. And especially with potential increase in tariffs in 2026, there's going to be a lot of ordering upfront. So just a thought and something to note is that if you have projects you need or batteries you need this year, you better start soon, because although it's 4 to 6 months now, that starts getting slightly longer and longer as you wait into June, July, maybe even August. You'll be basically probably pushed into 2026.
So there was a
So,
question, Alex, I just wanted to kind of throw out there asking about kind of repeating the 90-day hold going through customs. If you could kind of just
yep.
reiterate what that means and how it was different, and kind of what the reality is for us right now.
Yeah, again, it was very surprising for everyone, because I think historically and especially up until now, all the tariff changes have been based on the date of shipment. And again, it's just a nuance in the way that the executive order was written, and it was basically probably also to maybe to potentially shorten that window. Intentional or not, but very explicitly states that the 90-day window starting 14th goes for 90 days, and it's based on the date that it must clear customs by that date, by August 12th. And
Okay.
so again, there is a little bit of nervous about what are the ports going to look like August 5th, right? Is everyone in the whole world going to be trying to get equipment in, and our boats going to be backlogged, and our customs going to take an extra 2 days? I know that we had some orders that took place that shipped. They were in April. We saw that we anticipated this new tariff coming, so we were getting as many orders out as we could. A couple orders were sitting on a boat April 4th, and the boat decided for whatever reason to delay it until April 6th. So then because of that, we had to pay an extra tariff. And then there was another order that had something similar, that the boat was completely canceled their shit and said, "Hey, we're not going," and find another boat. And so that anyway, so we missed 2 windows because of that. And it's just all that to say is logistics right now are crucial. You can't just assume, oh, it's all taken care of. Like, you have to follow this thing every step of the way, and that is something that we're doing, and helping, I think, ease the concerns of developers and others who are ordering batteries. Is you've got to keep a close eye on that. Otherwise, yeah, the boat might be delayed and you just missed your window.
Okay, yeah, okay. That is interesting. So that just adds a lot of uncertainty there on that level. I mean, a big storm or something like that could cause those extra delays as well. So there's a lot that's just not in people's control. Interesting.
And
There was
that
a
way,
question that
one
I'm.
last point on that is that just
Oh
really,
yeah.
sorry, one last one real quick, is that a lot of manufacturers aren't willing to guarantee that delivery date. In the past, I think historically they say, hey, we know we can control the ship date, right? We'll commit to a date, we'll get it on the boat by this date. But they're saying, hey, look, I can commit to a ship date, but I'm not going to commit to a through customs date. So if you're going to, and so that's where it's also another level of risk, or we're having to take on sometimes, or we're sharing with our customers, or whatever it might be. But that's just another factor.
Yep, that's a good point. So there was a question. I'm going to go backwards a little bit because there was a question I meant to ask on that last slide, and it plays in with this as well. But country of origin, are we like, is this something that we need to be thinking about or considering in terms of this, and should be people should people be, what is the exact country of origin? I've already mentioned China being the dominant player, and I'm about to show that to you on the next slide. But in terms of, how the tariffs play out, is that something people should be having on their minds?
Yeah, I'd say definitely. I think even though a lot of these products are made by Chinese companies, and that goes whether we're talking about enclosure that actually ships from China versus cells, modules, racks, any other components which may ship somewhere else. It's certainly a concern of where is the biggest amount paid, which is when the product, whatever shape it's in, comes into the U.S. I know there have been some suppliers in other parts of Asia. For example, I've heard Vietnam and India ramping up production that had already been there, and that would be both by national companies in those countries as well as Chinese companies that have diversified and started spreading their production to those areas, fairly similar to what companies like Apple are doing, that they had been very China heavy and then kind of just trying to diversify a little bit. I think in general, the suppliers are very aware of this, and the price they're going to quote you will bake in, wherever that supply is coming from. But I would point out too, China, I think, has been the kind of hit the worst because they pushed back hardest on the tariffs. But also other countries are certainly not immune from them. I know Vietnam, for example, had some tariffs on them as well. I don't know exactly the levels. So yeah, certainly something to ask the supplier. If there's ever a way they can get the cost down, I'm sure they're willing to discuss that for a different point of origin.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, and I think I agree. I think that make a good point about that, and that's true, right? Although there haven't been other tariffs enacted yet in terms of or active at the moment on countries, there still are on the books, and they have a 90-day reprieve, 90-day window as well. So to renegotiate some kind of an agreement. So it is possible that, yeah, as that 90-day window expires, which I think for those would be in sometime in April. They're started in April, so that would be basically sometime in July. We may start seeing other countries like Vietnam, in particular, Indonesia, Malaysia, to go back having tariffs. So it is challenging to really make big decisions around pivoting outside of China right now because you don't really know what's going to be like on those countries. And on top of that, a lot of the manufacturing capabilities in Southeast Asia for battery storage is still very nascent and kind of just coming online. Everyone's planning for this in future, and I think my understanding of the conversations we've had is 2026. I'd say there'll be plenty of battery storage capacity, but it's not. They're kind of having to take some capacity that was there more for EVs and really kind of pivot for station storage and full cabinet scale solutions. So it's yeah, it's hard to completely diversify right now.
Got it. And then there was one other question that I meant to ask on the previous slide, so I'm still going to say backwards a little bit, but there's that delta, that difference between the inverters and the batteries. Is that do you guys expect to see, or have you heard any talking? Is that kind of difference expected to stay there between those two? Or would we expect the inverters kind of started off at the 25% to begin with tariff? Is there any, reason we should think that might change at all?
Not from my understanding. I mean, I think that number, the difference is based on a Biden administration tariffs and so it was pre-Trump, and that it's just a different category, had different ad valorem tax on it. So
Okay.
I think that there isn't a reason in my mind that it would directly change in the short term, but it's definitely possible. As I know, one of the areas, and I think you mentioned it here, Drew, or in the last bullet, is around cybersecurity requirements. And so inverters in particular are more sensitive for that, right? Because the batteries, I think, are looked at as more of a, let's say, unintelligent device, meaning it's just a, more passive, whereas an inverter can be more active and potentially controlled or managed. Same with the energy management systems. So I do think there's going to be potentially, I don't know how it's going to change, but I think that inverters are a more sensitive area. And I think that is why there's that increased tariff above the batteries due to that nature.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I would point out too that in general, especially for larger systems, the inverter and the controls end up comprising a much smaller portion of the cost. There's still an important expense, but they're getting hit with a higher tariff. It's a smaller line item. but also, as Alex mentioned, there are more options. For example, there's companies like EPC Power, which is a U.S. made inverter, has been U.S. made, even long before the tariffs. So, I think there's more options in that space, and there's those additional cybersecurity concerns. We had mentioned the FEOC there as well. That's something creeping in that has something more to do with the bill and the provisions of the ITC. However, all of that is kind of wrapped up in the concerns around foreign supply, whether they're from tariffs or whether they're from cybersecurity concerns.
Yeah. And just to add on that real quick, that, obviously another benefit of domestic inverters is just that's one way to help boost your domestic content percentage of your overall project. So if that's a concern or a question for developers.
Yeah, and that's so a question that did come through is kind of asking if owners are more concerned about tariffs or kind of this bill that's moving through Congress. And again, I know we weren't super prepared to talk about the bill, and it could change quite a bit. But curious if either of you are seeing that from folks. So, and this foreign entity of concern, if I understand it right, that's kind of more in the current bill, and just kind of maybe expounding on that a little bit on what does that mean, and who are those foreign entities, and how would that play into potential changes for the energy storage systems?
Do you want to start, Drew, or you want me to dive in?
Go ahead.
All right. Yeah, I think there's a lot there. It's more of a timeline thing. So that from our customers, I'll just speak to in my experience right now. Short term, people who have projects that they're delivering in the next or need to start building in the next 6 months, much more concerned about tariffs because at that point it's they have to send a bunch of money out and they need to know how much money they need to send. So I think tax credits are obviously for them are a very big concern, but I think at this point a lot of these projects they're kind of locked in and have to go forward one way or the other. So for those kind of developers or projects, it's obviously more of a tariff question. But anyone who's looking at projects in 2026 and beyond, I think that's when, or who are still in the development stages, right, of the project, where there's, should I sign this PPA or should I sign this big expensive agreement that's putting me on the hook for this? Those are the ones obviously who are a little more concerned about the tax credits and the future of this, what's going to happen with this bill. With the FEOC list, it's also, yeah, that's part of the IRA that has been there. It's unclear about which companies are going to get listed on that. It's also a little unclear about if there is a company listed on that, is it any component from that company or is it just finished products from that company? And then obviously the other challenging thing is there's a lot of different battery companies, or each company has a lot of different subsidiaries and entities in different countries, and how easy is it to keep track of all those things? So there's a lot of to me, it's always a little bit of a whack-a-mole trying to you kind of make one area, you regulate one area, and then there's another opening in another way in. But curious, Drew, if you have any thoughts on that.
I mean, I think it's hard to say. I mean, all these things are wrapped up together. The way I think about it is, you have a financial model for a battery project or a solar plus storage project. Before 2023, before the IRA came around, you were having to make these things pencil with the much higher hardware costs and the lack of ITC, or at least for the battery portion. There was no ITC. And so they were still making it work, right? There were just certain ways that you had to configure the project, and there were certain returns you could hit given those numbers. Fast forward, project costs fall, IRA happens. In some ways, the energy storage industry had never had it so good, and so a lot of projects that wouldn't have penciled before do pencil with both these items, both the ITC and the tariff effects. Now that both of those are kind of working against energy storage, again, we're sort of in that turn the clock back period. I think the result is that you'll have a lot of projects that just don't pencil, that they looked great a year ago and now don't. But there are still quite a few projects that looked good a year ago and now looked very good a year ago and now still look good, but not quite as good. So I think that'll take a while to shake out, especially given the long time cycle of these projects.
Great. Yeah, thanks for that insight. And it's I think that it's definitely something that we need to keep an eye on in that sense. Um, I do want to make sure that we continue on and kind of get into this. I want to talk about manufacturing, U.S. versus global, and what the tariffs again specifically, but trying to look at what this impact is on our U.S. based manufacturing. And so to get there first, I want to look at kind of where we stand today, what the projections are. So, and we have this chart that Elements put together via some Bloomberg data. And so looking back a couple of years in where we had 2022 data, you could see that the manufacturing capacity, and this is broken out by country, and so China being 77%, and then we have US, Poland, and rest of the world kind of bringing up the other 23%. So China far and away, dominating that market, and then projecting into 2027, which is now just a couple years away, and seeing that China still, very much dominant in the U.S. Even with it, I think it was something like where we went to 908. So yeah, quite a huge jump from 70 gigawatt hours to 908 gigawatt hours in the US, but still just kind of a blip in this whole thing. So just kind of wanted to bring in that to the forefront of people's minds, and kind of that comment there, the note up there, that how China is, dominating the control of the raw materials really, and that really helps them kind of keep that dominance. And so this is something that we should be keeping an eye on. And there was a question that came in that I wanted to kind of get your guys' opinion on. I don't know if this is something, that you're kind of tracking or thinking of. But Robert was asking about, to this point, China dominating the raw materials. Does this open up other technologies, long duration or others? Is there an opportunity for other technologies to maybe step into where lithium ion has been, the dominant technology?
So
Yeah.
just to provide some color on that, when he says LDES, that's long duration energy storage, referring to how traditional lithium ion has been more effective from 2 to 4 hours. Recently, they've seen bigger 6 hour, even 8 hours lithium systems showing that they can be cost competitive. I think it is true that because the real big supply chains of batteries are so China focused, and some of the alternative technologies are less so. Although I would be quick to point out that there are things like sodium ion, which some of the research has really been led by the big battery companies in China, such as CATL and BYD. But there are some other tech out there that are sort of newer, cutting edge, much smaller. I think just the volumes. I think from that same Volta report, lithium ion was about 98% of all battery installations in 2024. So we're talking about real small fractions of the market. I do think, yeah, they could have a bit of a leg up, but ultimately, I think those technologies are small because the market isn't there for them. Like the offtake arrangements, the ways that they can make money isn't there. And if they have a kind of a cost advantage because lithium has these additional costs imposed on it, that will help them compete against lithium head to head, but it won't help markets start asking for 10-hour, 20-hour storage. I think that there's hope that that happens, but up until now, the markets really haven't been asking for it. And that's still a big hurdle for those technologies to overcome.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I think that it is definitely an opportunity for alternative battery storage technologies like, long duration energy storage, flywheel technologies, a lot of really great opportunities that I hope will enter the market. But I think the reality is that those are similar to the US manufacturing of lithium cells are still 1 to 3 years away from the scale that's needed. And that's where it's a challenge to really fill that gap with alternative energy storage solutions. So I think it's definitely going to help, and it's definitely going to become a bigger percentage, like non-lithium ion battery storage from China. But as Drew mentioned, sodium ion is probably one of the next most likely technologies to take off, and again, that's very heavily driven by Chinese manufacturers. So just in general, though, if there is a way for the US to catch up, I think it is leapfrogging. So it is about figuring out a better technology that work that, is just more efficient or, lower costs. Safer is a big one right now. And maybe that is where the US finds the edge and leads and eventually builds to a scale that, kind of surpasses some of the Chinese manufacturers. But again, it's a longer term game. And I think in the short term, to me, it's more of it's an opportunity um, it's a slow transition. I think we'll talk about this later, right? But around like can you integrate Chinese cells in the US? Is that a starting point? And then from there, maybe can you go into basically manufacturing or sourcing cells from other countries, and then from there, can you eventually start to source cells domestically? So there are steps in this domestication, if you want to call it that, of the battery storage ecosystem here, but it's a process.
No, I think that's perfect lead into kind of into this slide and kind of some of these points that we wanted to talk about, so we can expand on that. So yeah, so looking at those timelines, and yeah, the integration, US based integration versus US manufacturing. I guess that would be one thing that I'm really curious on getting your guys' take. I mean, it seems like that's a way that maybe manufacturers previously, we've seen this in the solar industry before, where US modules, they if they're manufactured or if they're at least assembled in the US, they get either they don't receive the tariffs, or there's a price break on those. Is that something that you guys are expecting or looking at seeing? This integration versus manufacturing. Do you see that being the intermediate step, I guess?
I think it's again a question of time scale. Just like these projects take a really long time, especially the utility scale, to kind of go through planning and financing and offtake and all the various steps. Manufacturing is even longer. Think of the timelines to figure out a financial model, get finance to build a factory, there's always some level of incentives from federal and from state. It's also a little counterintuitive because there was the IRA, which has all these provisions in it for domestic content. And so there was kind of a real push, as well as a lot of money to finance those factories. So they started building the factories, of the first of which are just coming online here, and we're going to talk about a few of those in a minute. And then alternatively, now there's a kind of a brakes being put on that because the IRA is under threat, while simultaneously tariffs have provided its own separate route to incentivizing U.S. manufacturing. So I think all that combines to say, yes, there will be a boon, or it will be a bump in U.S. Manufacturing, but still the underlying theme here, as we noted, is uncertainty, and it's very difficult to finance, to build, to eventually bring online a factory in that kind of climate of uncertainty, as well as the fact that I think in the long run it's going to be seen that without those benefits, it's hard to make those factories competitive. The cost of labor in the U.S., the lack of experience in certain things. I think it's going to be difficult to really, when it comes down to it, show that they're competitive. But certainly there's some momentum in the field of moving manufacturing here into the U.S.
Yeah. And I think one thing I want to point out is that, during the peak of the tariff, a few months ago, like a month ago or 2 months ago, when it was up to basically 156.9% on battery storage, it was still cheaper to source from Chinese manufacturers than it was to source from US integrators who were integrating Chinese cells. So again, that's the one thing that at that point it made me realize that, okay, look, we're still not efficient enough here and with our scale and with our integration capabilities to be competitive, even in that kind of a tariff environment. So I think it is going to take a big investment in the U.S. Scale of integration first, and then eventually cell manufacturing second, before we can really be competitive and make sure that there's actually a better quality product. I think right now, with all the fire safety issues and concerns, to me, the number one thing we should be looking at is who makes the best product right now and the safest product, and ultimately that should be driving. I would wish that was driving more decision making. rather than which, country was behind which product, and look at a longer game, saying, look, if we want to build domestic manufacturing, we can and we should, but we have to, we have to do it in a way that we're actually going to build a better product.
Yeah, I think that's been one of my big takeaways is just well, one, the better product, the fire safety is definitely something that's top of my mind. And but yeah, just that certainty, it seemed like the IRA was building that in, kind of some certainty for manufacturers, and being dumped on its head has made it very difficult for manufacturers.
Just one quick thing to add there. I totally agree with the point of, it's not all costs. There's a lot of competition on cost, but then what are you getting? And things like performance, safety, warranties. A lot of these products, especially on the utility scale, will have up to 20-year warranties, so can it really last that long? However, on the cost front, if you think of that slide I showed before, where we're going from, 300 to 200 to, the latest was $165 a kilowatt hour. The latest numbers for really large scale procurement of that same scope in China. So really big batteries being built within China. They had a bid recently. It was down to $65 a kilowatt hour. So, what are you getting for that price? It's hard to say. There's probably lower quality, but it just shows that I think as time goes on, even if we could, put a huge effort in and get to the exact same price point of where China is today, they will have continued to bring the cost down and down and down to the point where, even with tariffs, as Alex mentioned, sometimes that our products, even when very protected, can't compete with what's getting imported.
Yeah. All right. I want to make sure we talk about some solutions here coming up in a minute, but real quick, just wanted to flash this at folks. And this is just example of some domestic battery suppliers, some things that were pulled from, press releases, some news reports, things like that. So this is not an exhaustive list. This is not meant to be a list that's, I don't know, that you take to the bank or anything like that. But rather the idea here, the intention here is we have a number of energy storage manufacturers that are in the US building up their factories and across the different types of technology. So you can, there's some EV stuff in here, there's some stationary, there's some portable systems. And so the idea here is that, we as a country are seeing these grow. Probably as we already saw previously, China is going to still outpace us, outpace the rest of the world combined. And but we do have some momentum here and some things that we're moving on in terms of actual U.S. based manufacturing.
Yeah. And I think just to add on this list, I think there's a lot of really awesome partnerships happening. And again, I think one thing to note is several of them still involve Chinese manufacturers, even with U.S. in the U.S. So whether it's joint ventures or partnerships, I think we have to, realize and I think in Trump's previous term, in his first term, he was actually very supportive of having Chinese manufacturers move to the U.S. So I'm kind of curious to see how that plays out because it does create jobs domestically. That's one. So that's one point. And another is around, a lot of the early pilots and existing capacity for battery storage, LFP in particular, in the US is driven more for EVs. And so even if you're in stationary storage and you're waiting for batteries to be made here, it's going to be a little bit probably longer term before you're really getting that scale that you need, especially for utility scale projects like Drew was talking about, which you might need 200 megawatt hours, which could be, an entire capacity for a year of a single plant here. So just something to keep in mind, but I think there's a lot of promise here by seeing, just what's happening and which states as well are really subsidizing and supporting those manufacturers. For example, I know someone mentioned on the questions that they've got some funds from the state of Michigan to manufacture domestically, and obviously that's where I think that Natron Energy is working on sodium ion. So it will be exciting to see how this plays out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So the state level as well is an important aspect to this to help move us along. Okay, so getting close to the end, keep an eye on time, trying to end by the top of the hour. And so wanted to get into on some of the solutions on, how you're advising your clients. And there was a great question from Greg asking about, how do we communicate the long-term value of solar? And something, Alex, you had mentioned when we were doing our prep was, if I believe it was you, Alex, talking about the cost of energy continuing to rise. And, even with tariffs, even with these types of systems being put in place, I think that kind of speaks to this long-term value of solar, of being able to produce your, and now with storage, being able to store your own energy, use it kind of when you need to. And I mean, that's part of the plan. And of course, they're all projections, but nonetheless, utility rates have, of course, been shown to continue to rise, and no expectation of those ever dropping. So there's definitely that aspect in terms of communicating that value. But I guess I'd open it up to both of you on, right now in today's reality, how are you advising your clients? Are you, safe harbor, are you buy now, or, I guess, Alex, I'll open it up to you first. And kind of what is that conversation like with your clients?
Yeah, yeah, great point. And or great question. And yeah, and I think again, it's also the demand for electricity that is going up, right? 2% a year or so based on AI-driven data centers in particular, and
Yes.
EV electrification. So I just think that getting more electricity at a reasonable price is crucial. So how we're advising our customers is really about, one is looking at, we deal with a lot of CNI scale projects, like 1 MWh to 5 to 10 MWh. And so one way we are advising our customers is right sizing the project, saying, hey, can you shrink the project a little bit to maybe help offset some of these increased costs? Like really make sure that every kilowatt hour you're deploying is paying its fair share, or it's being monetized in the best way. And that's also like revenue stacking is another part of that. So you look at, can you do frequency regulation? Can you do energy arbitrage? Can you increase your solar, store extra excess solar and use it at night? There's all kinds of ways to monetize storage now, especially with virtual power plants and things like that. And really, it's ultimately looking at, and then lastly, it's kind of, yeah, like let's get ahead of this. So if you know you need batteries, order them as soon as possible. You know what the world is today. We can, there's very easy ways to store them and even charge them and maintain them if you need to hold on to them for 6 to 12 months or more. And I think that's another opportunity, is to get ahead of it. But yeah, it's a tough one, and especially for utility scale, which I'm sure Drew can kind of comment on more, where you're really planning 20, 1, 2, 3 years out. I think one last thought is just locking in partnerships, like really have crucial partnerships. You can't really control tariffs or tax credits, but you can control your relationship with manufacturers, and working with people like Drew or myself at GridVest, we can help customers to do that, and to basically build master supply agreements that they know that they can get a certain price. At least the price you're getting out of the factory in China or wherever you manufacture. But those are a couple of things to consider, and yeah, how to navigate the uncertainty.
Yeah, I know we just have a minute or so left here, but every customer is different. I think it really depends on the time horizon. We have some customers who are, planning out projects for the next 10 years. And so for them, I think, it's stay the course, push forward these things, this too will pass. There will be another day when the batteries become more and more useful on the grid. That said, if you have a shorter time horizon, it can be really hard. And if you can put everything on pause for 6 months, sometimes that's the best choice for everyone, because there's just so much uncertainty. I look at, when the tariffs came back down, who wanted to be the person who paid, that very high tariff, and then 24 hours later they realized, they could have waited. So I think the lesson there is it's okay to wait and let the dust settle if you can afford to, based on your business model. But every customer is different, every project is a little different, and yeah, we really try to take that look for everyone we talk to of, what is your time horizon? What makes the most financial sense for you at this point in time?
Yeah, I would imagine you need to have a little bit thick skin, and all of us need to, I guess, and have that ability to kind of write it out. And I like that point, Drew, of just, yeah, this too shall pass, and kind of uh, we don't know, and maybe waiting is that right answer.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're getting right at the top of the hour, and I want to make sure that we get all of our contact info up on the screen for folks to be able to reach out to us if they have questions or comments. And so real quick for Mayfield Renewables, just want to, we do, again, I mentioned some of the education we do, encourage people to take a look at our website, our online courses and our in-person courses. Happy to chat with people on different topics. And as I mentioned, in October, we are doing our second education summit. It'll be in Seattle this year. Really excited for this. We'll talk about a lot of topics and very focused on solar and solar plus storage projects. And just we'll have 3 different tracks this year, so hopefully something for everybody, and be able to get a lot of education through there. So take a look at that. I encourage you to visit us and come see us up in Seattle. And then next month, gonna kind of continue on this trend a little bit, or this theme around kind of more financing. I know that AMA, we've done a lot of more technical stuff, but next month, Jacob, our CEO, and Bill Shevlin are going to join us talking about financing economics with microgrids. So look forward to having folks join us for that. And then finally, here's our contact info. If people want to reach out, here's ways of getting a hold of us. If there's topics that you want to see us talk about on future episodes, love to hear from folks. And I just want to say a big thanks to everybody who joined, and then also Alex and Drew. Really appreciate you guys taking the time it took to prepare for this, and then also sitting through talking about this. I know that I've learned a lot through the process, so just really appreciate you guys' time.
Great to be here.
Yeah, it was a great conversation, and hope that this was helpful for folks listening in, navigating some uncertainty. But I'm nonetheless very excited about what's happening in renewables and battery storage in general, even with all the ups and downs. I think we're trending in the right direction.
Yeah, I would agree. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. Appreciate it, and hope you enjoy the rest of your day.